I learned even from my first company, which is when you talk to people and you ask them, what do you think about my little baby, my little application? They won't tell you.
Nobody will tell you the baby's ugly. Never.
And it's always like, this is awesome. This is cool, Dave. Like, thanks for sharing this with me. But as soon as you ask them to open up the wallets, that's really when you know whether you're solving the right problem.
You just heard from David Park, the CEO and co-founder of Narada, an enterprise AI agent that uses large action models based on breakthrough UC Berkeley research to automate complex, multi-step workflows. Welcome back to Build Mode. I'm your host, Isabel Johannesson, and this week, we're catching up with the Startup Battlefield alumni about what they've been up to since we last saw them on stage. I first met Narada when they applied for Startup Battlefield in 2024, and given how compelling their technology was, I was struck by how much they had accomplished with such a lean team and minimal VC funding. David shares in this discussion that there was strong investor interest, but the team chose a deliberate approach to fundraising and team building. And drawing on his experience founding and exiting Coverity, David believes that it's better to build a lean, mean building machine rather than scale prematurely or spend carelessly. We also get into David's experience as a top 20 company in Startup Battlefield. And if you'd like to throw your hat in the ring for the 2026 cohort, applications are open now. We are looking for early-stage companies that have an MVP, so nominate a founder or you can nominate yourself for the Startup Battlefield at techcrunch.com/apply. If you want to take these conversations beyond the podcast, then come join us in person at a TechCrunch event. On June 9th in Boston, we're hosting our Founders Summit, which is essentially Build Mode in real life. It's a full day focused entirely on founders, builders, and the conversations that actually move startups forward. It's also a great way to sharpen your story if you're thinking about applying to Startup Battlefield. Then, October 13 to 15 in San Francisco, we're back for TechCrunch Disrupt, where the Startup Battlefield 200 takes the stage. So if you want to cheer them on, or just network with thousands of founders and VCs and tech enthusiasts, then grab your tickets at techcrunch.com/events and use code BuildMode15 for 15% off any ticket type. And that discount is exclusively for you Build Mode listeners, and we'd love to see you there. Okay, that's enough of that. Please enjoy this conversation with David Park from Narada. Hi, Dave. Welcome to Build Mode.
Hi, Isabel. Thanks for inviting me.
Great to see you, and I'm very excited to get some of these updates I hear you at Narada are up to some very exciting things.
Yes, thank you. And happy to tell you a little bit about what we've been up to ever since our first real announcement of the company and technology at TechCrunch Disrupt a little over a year ago.
You guys have been flying under the radar, but doing some really cool, stealthy things. So let's start from the beginning, though, for those listening. What is Narada and what is your background?
Yes. So Narada is an agentic process automation platform for automating complex processes and tasks in the enterprise. So think about HR processes like hire to retire or order to cash. These processes that almost every enterprise struggles with, and it involves just a lot of manual pain. And so leveraging years of research that we led at the UC Berkeley AI Lab, we developed what we call a large action model that just by chatting, prompting, describing in natural language what you need done, our AI process automation platform actually automates these processes. Almost like you're instructing a smart college intern. Hey, here's what you do. Log in here. You look for this, download this, analyze it. Then you go into this other web portal and update these fields. Just by describing it, Narada is actually able to agentically reason and execute across these complex enterprise applications.
Okay. And I mean, before we get into your background, so I have a million questions about that to begin with, but I'm curious. So agentic startups and agentic AI are sort of the hot buzzword these days. And when you have your action model that you guys have built, what is different about this than sort of the buzz and the hype that we're seeing in the market these days?
What it boils down to is, if you look at AI, it's kind of inherently probabilistic. It's kind of opaque. Sometimes when you give it the same prompt, it comes back with slightly different results. Mm-hmm. And so that's okay if my son is using it to help him write his English paper, but not so much in the enterprise. Think healthcare processes, financial processes that require super high reliability and robustness. 99.99% consistency and reliability. And so the research we led at the UC Berkeley AI Lab was, how do you actually leverage the power of these AI models and large language models, but have them actually execute things very reliably and consistent? And that ultimately is the difference for us, is we don't get to maybe 60, 70%, 80% reliability. Many of our customers require and demand like 99.99%.
And I know you guys are obviously iterating and evolving Narada as we speak and every day, but how close are you to that 99.9% accuracy?
We're pretty much there.
Wow.
And so, many of our customers tell us they've tried everything else under the sun. They had great demos. It seemed to work. But as soon as they actually tried using it in production, in real life, like complex environments, they just didn't work. And they told us that we're the only ones that actually works in production at scale. And that means a lot to us, because a lot of what goes into making AI actually deal with the complexities and the variances that you find, the messiness, if you will, in the enterprise, there's a lot of hard problems and last mile problems that need to be solved. It's not like you can just, let's just wait another 6 months and maybe hope that, one of these big foundational models will get so smart that it's able to figure out how to automate my, order to cash process. That's just not going to happen. And so, before we presented at TechCrunch, we spent years working and slogging it out in kind of the dark corners of the enterprise with customers, solving many of these last mile problems.
Because I think we're seeing a lot of very verticalized agentic software, right? That is like, okay, fine, for a very specific role, it does a very specific task. But what you're talking about is really a horizontal layer that can go across all industries and learn in very niche and nuanced contexts. I guess my question for you is, it sounds like there's a lot of like trust and privacy and data that would be required for you to get the passwords to all of these different tools. How do you sort of establish and build those relationships with customers and potential customers?
That's a great question. So first of all, we don't retain or store any data. We don't use data to trade on, because we're focused on execution, right? Once we actually complete that task, everything is dropped. Nothing is stored. Secondly, we also provide as an option a fully on-prem deployment as well. So think, financial companies, insurance companies, where ultimately they don't want anything going outside their perimeter or their own cloud. And so having that option to actually deploy everything in-house is also a big differentiator for us.
Well, when you start working with a customer, do you have a call with them where you sit down and kind of outline, these are some of the processes we'd want to automate, and then, the different users within the company might have their own sort of version of the process that they do in their niche jobs. How do you, infiltrate it and scale within an organization?
So telling the customer that they need to change a lot of things on their end and configure things and set up things, that's a lot of friction and cost. So as much as possible, we ask them really kind of two main questions. One is, where is most of the pain and the most impactful process that right now is delaying or, bogging down their ability to scale and operate? And then secondly, we ask them, just show us, describe to us, even show us live the process. Because as much as possible, the way we've designed Narada is that it will operate it almost like a human being would, right? If there's available tools, agents, APIs that can be invoked, great. Narada will figure out how to call those APIs. But most of these complex processes, at some point in that workflow, there's going to be some application or web portal that has no backend connections into the underlying data. So the only way to actually reason about them and operate them is what a human being would do, looking at what's on the screen. right? Looking at that web portal, clicking, scrolling, typing, downloading. And because Narada is actually able to operate in that way, purely agentically, reasoning about what's on the screen or that browser and operating it, a lot of times we just tell them, just show us what you guys would do manually. And very quickly, Narada can be set up to actually automate it, just even unattended without a human in the loop. And everything that we do is also based on prompts like English. Nothing is hard-coded, which is very, very important because in the enterprise, there's so much variability and things that are changing constantly that as soon as you just take a hard-coded approach, it might work for a couple of weeks, but they're going to constantly break.
Yeah. So I want to talk more about Narada specifically, but I also, you mentioned that, you guys are spun out from the UC Berkeley AI Lab, which is, of course, one of the, leading universities and AI labs in the world. But you are a Stanford man. Is that right?
Yes. So I did my undergrad and PhD work in computer science at Stanford. Started my first company, Coverity, with a professor there and some of my PhD buddies. Learned a lot through that process. And with that company, we bootstrapped it. So we actually turned down VC term sheets. And that, even though that was risky, it was one of the best decisions we made. Because when you don't have 10 million in the bank and you are poor, we were all poor at that time, you're almost forced to listen to customers because you have to build things that customers will pay money for. This time around, I wanted to build something 100 times bigger. And so I decided to team up with our rivals at UC Berkeley. So my two co-founders, one is a longtime AI and systems professor, Kurt Kwitzer at UC Berkeley. And then my other co-founder and CTO, Amir Gholami, he and his team led the research behind Narada at the UC Berkeley AI Lab.
When I first read your guys' application for Startup Battlefield, I remember reading the team and just being like, mic drop. You guys are like the perfect team. And it is so impressive, all of your backgrounds, but to come together across rival universities, putting our differences aside to build this amazing company. I was surprised that you guys hadn't raised a ton of money at that time because investors must be eyeing you or they must be coming to your door. And I know you finally did raise a round now. So tell me a little bit about that.
We did everything kind of backwards, right? So instead of thinking, let's build a nice looking flash deck and go talk to VCs and raise money, for over a year when we first started, like all we did was talk to customers. So we quickly built a prototype, and using that prototype, we just started talking to a bunch of customers. And literally, I think we tallied this up, right? So between my co-founders and me, I think we did close to 1,000 customer calls. That's all we did. That was essential because, we would like show them our little MVP and they would say something like, hey, Dave, this is great. I've been using it and it's helping me with my productivity. But let me show you something that's really painful that my management will open up their wallets for. And I think if we didn't kind of live, breathe, and kind of sit in their seats and wear their shoes to feel what they were going through, we never would have understood where the big problems were, why that pain still existed, and what are the hard problems, those last mile problems to make AI actually make a huge difference and impact to a point where they would actually open up their wallets. And I think that is something that I learned even from my first company, which is when you talk to people and you ask them, what do you think about my little baby, my little application? They won't tell you.
Nobody will tell you the baby's ugly. Never.
And it's always like, this is awesome. This is cool, Dave. Like, thanks for sharing this with me. But as soon as you ask them to open up their wallets, that's really when you know whether you're solving the right problem.
and whether you found, product market fit. And I think it sounds like you guys are at the stage where you're kind of ready to go more public with this and like tell the world that you are under the hood of many of these large enterprises. And with that came the VC round.
Yeah.
And so how did you decide to finally take VC money? Because I know you were a little bit kind of, hesitant to it in the beginning.
Yes. So, by the way, kudos to you. We had a number of, key advisors and investors when we started the company, but we wanted to actually not waste too much money, because I do believe that when you have too much money in the bank and you are not near product market fit, you're tempted to just spend money on things that actually don't help you evolve the company in the right way. It removes the friction to do a lot of wrong things. And so our journey was that we essentially bootstrapped it with a little bit of money from outside investors whose value was not just their money, but actually their advice early on in terms of developing and productizing our technology. But it was actually at TechCrunch Disrupt. That was really the first time we came out somewhat out of stealth mode to tell the world a little bit about what we're building. And actually, the VC who led the round, our most recent round, we met through TechCrunch Disrupt. So he heard our talk and demo, came up, and we started a conversation. And funny enough, so it's Bang Shukla from Monte Vista Capital. And initially I said, no, we don't need money. No, we're not going to raise any money. But Venk actually wanted to help us regardless. And so we developed a friendship. He and his team was very instrumental in making some very timely and key intros to customers. And through that journey, I said, look, I think this is the right partner. And as luck would have it, that's also right around the time when we started to get near product market fit and see that traction, some of that repeatable motion. And that's really the best time to raise money, right? Raise money when you have something that you want to expand and scale.
Yes.
Where you can actually show for every dollar that I raise and that I invest in, I'm getting, $10 back.
I mean, I think there are so many sort of good founder lessons in what you've just said. First of all, I'm very glad to hear that Disrupt and Startup Battlefield were valuable for you and you met your lead investor. That's, great for us to hear. But I think it often is the case that Battlefield leads people to raising rounds. It is a good launch pad for that and also to come out of stealth. So I'm very glad to hear that you got that results from it. And I think one of the most interesting points is waiting until an investor has proven their value and opened their doors to you and to customer intros before actually having them formally on the cap table. Because what we see is, a lot of startups get really excited by the big lights at Disrupt and all the investor attention. And then, they sign rounds without fully understanding, who this investor is, because it's a relationship that will last for the rest of their lives, the company's life. But the other thing that you're mentioning is this idea of not raising until you have found product market fit. Because there are so many companies today that are just raising, an absurd amount of money before they ever have any real traction, any product market fit, and scaling their go-to-market teams way too early.
Right.
And so I think what I love about your journey and how you guys are building this is, now you're at a real inflection point with Narada. And you have, found your product market fit, you've raised your round, and now ready to scale. So what is sort of your plan with this money and with this newfound PMF? What is next for Narada?
I will get to that, and that's an excellent question. But I do want to call out when we first started, how I mentioned, we did bring on some very, very key individual investors and advisors. So they're not your typical VC. And the reason why we did that, and, just to name a few, there were people like Andy Konwinski, co-founder of Databricks and Perplexity, Andrew Kryukov, Chris Rowan, who's done pretty much a big company every decade for the past 40 years, was because, even though this is not my first rodeo, I've got some gray hairs, I still think that as founders, we need to be constantly learning, and not just learning from our own experiences, but learning from other people, right? And so fast forward to now that we have a product that's actually working in production and we're signing up enterprises at faster and faster clip. Now it's all about how do we scale? How do we scale effectively while building a business, right? So we're not, just because we raise some more money, it doesn't mean that we're just going to go on a spending spree. Actually, I told the team, look, now that we have more money in the bank and we're actually cash flow positive, we have to be even more careful about how we're spending the money, making sure that we're making the right investments with proven ROI. And so in some sense, sounds kind of funny, but I've gotten even cheaper. But I think that's really required to build a business.
Yeah.
A lot of kind of what went into the thought process of raising money was a little bit of, hey, just insurance. Nobody knows, how the market's going to go over the next year or two. And at the same time, I think what's also allowing us to scale effectively is, when I first started my company, all we did was basically try to find customers and just sell direct, customer by customer. And, that's valuable because we as co-founders and me as a CEO, like I need to see firsthand, right? Like, does this product work? What's the customer saying? And spending time with them. But one of the best decisions we made was around the time of TechCrunch, when we came out, we actually started investing into a channel structure as well. Look, we're going to sell direct. We're going to basically source and find customers that we work with direct. But at the same time, we started investing in partnerships, friends who already have big sales teams, have already invested time and effort to establish relationships with many large customers. And so leveraging the channel and driving scale that way, where you spend time to go from one to many in a much shorter time period, while also with a lot of these large enterprises, it's much easier to actually slide in to existing contracts and piggyback off of them through our partners and channels versus basically starting from scratch and going through the entire sales cycle.
Yeah, I'm in the grand world of go-to-market strategies, I think that is a great move for you guys, and I think a lot of companies should look at that as an example of what to do. I think there's many clever ways to get in besides going the long and treacherous enterprise sales routes direct sales. And so now, you have your channels in place, you have your funding. Are you going to start hiring a go-to-market team, or where do you go from here?
Yes, and so we are starting to make investments on the go-to-market side. We need to invest in things that drive exposure and getting the message out to those companies that are in pain still and are struggling because they've tried this, they've tried that, and just a lot of cost and a lot of time, and it's not working. And so a lot of our focus now is around how do we take some of these initial successes and as quickly as possible get it in the hands of companies that need belief.
Let's talk a little bit about sort of your founder journey, because you just told me 3 companies, and Coverity, exited, right?
Yes.
Was acquired.
Yes.
I would love to learn just sort of, how that first time around is different from now with Narada.
The first time around, I was naive and didn't know what the heck I was doing. And actually, I used that to my advantage, right? So I would go to customers and tell them, look, I'm not a sales guy. I've never sold anything. And one of the best things I learned through that journey with my first company was that if you want to build a real business, ask the hard questions, right? Spend time with customers, and not just in selling, because when you have that contract and that purchase order, that's just the beginning, right? And some of those customers that we bootstrapped with, ultimately, they turned into multi-million-dollar deals, right? And it's always easier to sell more to a company that have already chosen you and have some level of trust in you. There is one thing that is a little bit different between Coverity, which is not part of Synopsys, and how we're building the company here at Narada, which is, when I was younger, I thought it was all about just technology and numbers and revenue. Here, all those things are important, but the foundation and the way we built the company from day one was focus on people, focus on investing in their development and learning. If you have that as your foundation, if that's ultimately your goal, not just, I just want to be rich, or I want to be famous and end up at the front page of TechCrunch, right?
Yeah.
You build companies the right way in that respect. And I tell every single one of my employees or prospective hires that, look, my goal as a CEO is that at the end of your journey with Narada, that I cannot guarantee that we're going to be huge and you're going to be rich. But one thing I can guarantee is that you will learn a lot. You will develop as a engineer or a salesperson or marketing person and get exposure and just try a lot of different functions within the company so that if down the road in 10 years, you want to build your own company, that you have the knowledge and you have the experience and the wherewithal to build companies the right way.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, Build Mode is obviously a podcast for founders and early founders. And like you said, to listen to people who have been there before and kind of learn the pitfalls and what not to do and what to do. What are sort of your maybe 2 or 3 main pieces of advice you would give an early stage founder? Having built 2 companies, one exited and one in the works, you have gotten your hands really dirty and you've seen probably all sides of the spectrum. What would you advise, maybe your son or someone who's really just like, I want to build a company one day? What would you tell them?
Yes. First thing is find something you're passionate about. If you're passionate about it, success will surely follow. And that's really important because I think, and there's studies out there around this, that one of the biggest factors that differentiate successful entrepreneurs and founders from ones that are less is just grit. You got to be able to fail 85 times and just get up in the morning and somehow convince yourself that you're going to get it right. Right? And I think without passion for something, it's too hard, right? It's too depressing, right? So that's number one. Number 2, just listen, spend time with customers. And I think the more that you spend time with customers and you listen and you ask the right questions and listen versus just thinking, I've got an agenda. I've got this thing that I've kind of prototyped or built, and I need to somehow figure out a way to push this down people's throats. I think that's the wrong way to approach it. It's boring. It's not sexy, right?
If you're passionate about it, I think it could be kind of fun.
That's right. So those 2 things go hand in hand, right? And then the third one is stick to your values. There are many times when you're going to be faced with a choice or a dilemma. It's like, should I cut some corners here? Should I maybe, withhold some information? Or, a lot of times when you take shortcuts and you deviate from your core values, even if it results in short-term gain, it ultimately comes back and bites as you scale up. That's something that I talk about in terms of what are our core values? How do we build companies? And even if it takes longer and it's more painful and potentially costly, is, stick to your core values, respected people, and build your company on integrity. Because customers in the long run and your partners and even your employees, they will see that.
Yeah.
They will see that, the company was built on a culture of integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much pressure these days for founders to build fast, and investor pressure most likely. But this idea of building a sustainable company, and maybe it takes a little bit longer to find those perfect hires and to kind of establish this company culture. But in the long run, there's a lot, fewer pitfalls you could fall into when you build it, with a good structure, and then you can go scale from there. But I think a lot of companies are kind of, building on chopsticks, or building on, what I mean, just like a very loose infrastructure, and then scaling so fast, and then you could fall pretty dramatically at the end of that.
That's right. That's right. And, we see evidence of this whole kind of mantra of fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
There's some level of truth to that, but that shouldn't be, a core principle for how you build a business.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about Battlefield. So you were in our top 20 in 2024. So obviously, some great updates that we've chatted about since then. But how was the experience in startup Battlefield? It really was the first time you sort of came out of stealth. I remember working on your pitch with you, and it was a joy to work with you. And it was exciting to be able to help you craft that narrative for the first time, really publicly.
You know what? It was one of the most memorable experiences of my life, to be honest. And I think it's not so much the venue and the many, many thousands of people there. And I think I shared with you, I'm used to being in front of large audiences. I grew up as a musician, as a pianist, right? But I think the fact that just listening to many of the other pitches and my cohorts who are also in that top 20, it just felt like that was a place, and this is really what building companies is about. People from all over the world solving all different types of problems, solving problems that help humanity, right? Or, cut down on forest fires. And I think that was the best part about it, right? It was not all about AI, and how do I become a billionaire as fast as possible. It was really about how do you drive real change that impact people's lives. And it doesn't have to be a company like us out of Silicon Valley. It could be out of some place in Colombia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I thought that was one of the coolest parts about being part and participating in that experience.
That's great. I love that that's what you took away from it, because that is also my favorite part of this job, is really being able to see innovation from all corners of the world. And it is so inspiring and quite comforting to realize that people are working on some of these massive challenges. Sometimes they just need a little bit of boost in visibility, maybe a boost in a check that a VC could write, but something to kind of elevate them in their vision. And I hope that's what we get to do with, Battlefield.
Right.
But how was it walking out on that stage and, giving your pitch to a panel of top tier Silicon Valley VCs? I know that Q&A can be daunting.
Yes. Actually, to be honest, the whole time I was thinking I hope our demo actually works. And so while I was talking, and I actually had my co-founder, I think he was on stage too.
Yeah.
That was really all I could think about is I hope our demo.
You're not the only one that
Yes.
thinks about that.
Exactly. But loved every second of it. Just being able to talk about, what we feel passionate about, like the problems that we're solving and how we're solving it. And really for the first time sharing with the public what we were doing. Mm-hmm. Because it was a little bit lonely, if you will, and kind of somewhat boring, just working in stealth, slogging it out in the back office of the enterprise, right? And so it was great to just come out and just see the response too, right? Because as soon as I talked about some of the problems and use cases and some of these very painful manual workflows that almost every knowledge worker has to deal with, I can actually, even though there were bright lights right in my face, I can actually feel the pain in the audience, like it was resonating with them. I thought that was...
It's cool to feel the pain. Yeah. No, and actually, no. I mean, we talked a lot about this at the beginning of a pitch. It's so important to really make the audience feel the pain. Otherwise, it's like, if they don't feel it, then it could be any solution.
That's right.
They don't get invested right away.
That's right.
But tell me a little bit more about sort of the response. So you get up and you pitch in front of all these people. I mean, you met your lead investor at Disrupt, but you also met some potential customer leads at Disrupt, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, a lot of good conversations and meetings, and even POCs came out of that. And I think I think the fact that, the people that attend TechCrunch Disrupt, the fact that they're the ones that are basically forward-looking, thinking like, look, you know what, status quo is not good enough. And they come to these conferences to learn, but also find things that could potentially be a game changer, right?
Very true. And I mean, I think that's one of the most inspiring parts about Disrupt is that people are hungry. I think I often go to conferences to scout for startups, and it's, a lot of sort of trade shows, and people are like, I have to be here and I have to look for these kinds of tech. But at Disrupt, everyone's like, please, like, I need to get into this roundtable. I want to talk to this person. Like, so much energy. And Battlefield really is sort of the pinnacle of that. And I'm glad that sort of resonated with you as well, because it's not, you have a lot of distractions when you're up on that stage and a lot of things to think about. But I'm glad that came through for you.
Right. And it's called Disrupt. It's called Disrupt for not for a reason, right? It's like, don't tell me about something that might save me just, a little bit of time or help me, incrementally. Like, tell me about something. Show me something that's truly disruptive. Mm-hmm. I think the companies and the people that are bold enough to be like, no, these things need change. Mm-hmm. Enough, right? Mm-hmm. It's been years and decades of just living in the dark ages, right? Things really need to get disrupted, and it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it is happening.
Right, it is already happening.
Where Narada fits perfectly in. You guys are changing the game, and I think that, there's so many exciting things ahead for you all, and I cannot wait to continue following your journey. But it's been a pleasure talking with you this afternoon, Dave, and, we'll see you again soon. Build Mode is a TechCrunch podcast. Each episode is produced and edited by Maggie Nye and hosted by me, Isabel Johannesson. Our art and design is also by Maggie Nye. A big thanks to Morgan Little, who leads our audience development, the Foundry and Cheddar video teams, and most of all to you, the builders, and everyone else in the wider startup community. We'll see you back here next time.